And it is actually Rajesh Parikh's favorite subject. At the height of the pandemic, when you actually had, doctors themselves from small private hospitals in India. Dr. Matthew, you may not know this, so it's interesting for you to know this. We actually had small private hospitals sending their staff to stand in long lines to buy remdesivir, over which science was divided as to whether it worked at all. Rajesh Parikh was among those that said this is a waste of time. So now my question to you is this, Dr. Parikh: if this is based on the same principles of remdesivir and it needs really early intervention to have any efficacy, does it, I don't want to be a dampener, but does it still give you excitement and optimism? You're on mute, sir. Now you're on.
Yes, Barkha, always a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for recollecting my tremendous apprehension about what was happening with remdesivir, particularly in our country. I am in virtual agreement, if you'll pardon the pun, with my co-panelists in both their excitement and concern about this drug. I think Dr. Matthew perhaps has particular reason to be excited. The research has happened in Emory University in his hometown. And yes, it is promising, it is exciting, and an independent body has looked into it. So I'm not going to repeat what my colleagues have said, just add on to a few things. An independent body has looked at the data, as has been appropriately pointed out. It's not published, it's not been peer reviewed, and it's not been around long enough for us to look at certain midterm onset or even late onset side effects. But whatever we've seen, the side effects are actually less than those of placebo. So all of that is exciting in terms of the principle. And yes, the word "veer" at the end of it is just indicative of that it works like any other antiviral agent in stopping the replication. The difference, however, between remdesivir and this, and which is why our enthusiasm needn't be that dampened, we could have cautious optimism, is that it is demonstrated to work in patients who have mild to moderate disease. The hospitalization rate differences between the placebo and the study group are impressive, as are the death rate. So there are many reasons to feel excited about it. About the supply chain, and that's an interesting point. Merck has planned on manufacturing 10 million doses by the end of the year. And of course, 3 to 4 times that much in the coming year. They're betting on it. That kind of, makes me feel a little more optimistic about it.
I have to understand, given how skeptical you were about remdesivir, why is this different?
The difference is in the data. The difference in the way the data has been collected. Remdesivir was a repurposed drug. It was a drug which was, initially researched for Ebola and various other things. And even there were concerns. And it was repurposed. And the data was just not there. It wasn't as impressive as this drug. But on the other hand, there's also reason to be cautious, because I think it's a bit premature to get terribly excited about this. This pandemic has been full of many drugs which have come in the guise and the avatar of panaceas and then have turned out to be damn squids. So absolutely, I mean, I'm with you in, you're being an ethical chronicler, if I may say so, of what is happening, to be cautious, to be concerned. But there is a difference. And the difference is what we are seeing in a research study and looked at by an independent body. So it's not the pharmaceutical which has looked at it, that they are showing there's a difference. But there is another thing which I am, quite pleased about, and that is in the pricing policy. So ordinarily it would cost $700 for the course, but what Merck has promised that based on the World Bank's economic index of countries, the pricing is going to be different in different countries so that it is affordable and accessible to all. Now, this is dramatically different to what happened in the early days of the AIDS pandemic, yes, where people were making enormous and unreasonable profits from the drug. Also, if you're looking at 50,000 rupees as treatment, and you as the treatment over here, and weigh that against the costs of hospitalization and other costs, even at that price, I don't think it's very high. But I'm glad that they're going to reduce it in a country like ours.
And I'm reminded of the fact that poor families at the height of the second wave were spending 50,000 rupees on a single injection of medicines that were absolutely dodgy and dubious, as it turns out. Dr. Rajesh Parikh, do we know and I'm sorry if I'm asking somewhat very basic questions, but I think those are the basic questions that would strike our audience, which is not trained like all of you experts. Do we know if this new COVID pill is variant agnostic?
Actually, what they did are genomic studies on the patients who benefited from the pill. Actually, in all patients, not in everybody. But what they found that in the ones that benefited, it cut across all the genomic variants, the alpha, the delta. So, but again, these are very, very small studies, genomic studies that were done. But Barkha, if I may add, on the comparison between the monoclonal antibodies and the current medication, and just adding on to what my colleagues have said, I've watched the development of monoclonal antibodies with tremendous interest over the last 40 years. I was actually, when I was at Johns Hopkins, I was actually deputed to go to NIH to attend a very preliminary meeting on the development of monoclonal antibodies and report to my department what was happening. And the interesting thing about monoclonal antibodies is they are like targeted missiles. They are missiles which go specifically and neutralize the virus. And over the last 35 years, it's been a very exciting journey, culminating in the award, the Nobel Prize awards. Of course, these are monoclonal antibodies used specifically in cancer treatment. And, 2 years ago, the Nobel Prize was awarded. And I've also witnessed the use of monoclonal antibodies in patients. And so, undoubtedly, they're superior to the current medication. However, what happens, and they've been around for a long time, but they're phenomenally expensive. I mean, there's no comparison in the costing. And then again, as has been pointed out, it has to be a continuous infusion into the body. It's delivered with a small pump which calibrates it and gives it at a certain rate, but clearly not easy to administer as opposed to the pill. So if you look at the cost effectiveness, then I think the balance clearly tilts in favor of an oral pill as opposed to a medication which is given by.
So it's a difference of cost, not a difference of efficacy for you. You actually
Oh,
think the
it's more
antibodies
efficient.
are.
I think, to the best of my knowledge, the data is clear that monoclonal antibodies are here to stay. So they're not being talked about, as you mentioned in the beginning. That's because of the
Yeah.
cost factor, and they're not being affordable. But they're still the best known treatment that we have. And eventually, all the new treatments will have to be weighed against that gold standard in terms of efficacy, though we cannot ignore the cost factor.
Dr. Parekh, a quick last word to you, and I'll ask Dr. Matthew to close for us. Do you share Vinita's, sort of phenomenal optimism that even if we don't get the supply of this COVID pill, it's okay, we can manage?
Well, I'll tell you what I see happening, and I have a feeling I'm going to be right. We are great in replicating, not just viral replication, but it also in generic replication. And before you know it, Barkha, with all the companies whose names you mentioned, I have a strong feeling we're going to be supplying this medication, if indeed it holds up its promise to the rest of the world. I just like to end with one fun fact. This name is such a tongue twister, and frankly, I must
Yes,
confess,
Molnupiravir. Yeah, I'm like
you know what,
struggling to
Barkha?
remember it.
Yeah, and Barkha, knowing what a stickler you are for details, I actually rehearsed, pronouncing this word, and I tried to figure out where it came from. And here's the fun fact: it comes actually from the Avengers. In the Avengers series, Thor has this hammer with which he just can kill anything and anybody. And that is an even more unpronounceable word, Mjolnir or something like that, which really sends your tongue into a spasm. And Dean Lee, the guy who kind of headed the research at Emory, is probably an Avengers fan, as is Swapi, our son, who drove me nuts by putting Avengers and Star Wars references in our first book, which you reviewed very generously. But,
Yes.
here is another guy who's an Avengers fan, and I don't know whether this is hype, but he looks upon it as the hammer of Thor, which is, going to wipe out
Your,
the virus. Let's hope it
your,
works. No
your,
harm in
your,
hoping.
your son, Dr. Swapnil Parekh, tweeted warning that the millennials are now going to take over medicine, move over old people. I think that was for all of us. Dr. Matthew, last word to you. Yeah, it is a tongue twister of a name, Molnupiravir. Thor's hammer is what Rajesh has just explained to us. But in terms of how soon can the world have this medicine, what's left to happen?
Well, I'm going to leave on a very optimistic note. And by the way, instead of molnupiravir, maybe we can call it molnu, almost like
Yes.
monu, right? So we can make it sound almost Indian. But I definitely am optimistic that Merck will try its best. I mean, Merck is not necessarily doing that well. I think this is their opportunity to show the world on a huge platform that at the end of the day, Barkha, I always say this, until everybody is safe, nobody is safe. It doesn't matter if America vaccinates the whole country. Until India is safe, we're not all safe together. So I still feel like the most important thing with this pandemic is not only the optimism about this oral drug, but also the fact that we have to mass produce vaccines. That to me has been really the difficulty in the pandemic. It doesn't matter how much vaccines America gives India. At the end of the day, why are we not mass producing vaccines? Because remember, this drug does not substitute for a vaccine. You don't want to get the virus in the first place. I'm also taking care, Barkha, of a lot of people that have long COVID. 30% of people who actually recover from COVID have symptoms of COVID for 3 to 6 months. Their heart racing, brain fog. So people listening to us in India and all over the world, I think we have reason to be optimistic about both the vaccine and the drug. And eventually, I think that we are going to get through this pandemic. I want all of us to feel that sense of hope at a time when so many people are dying. But lastly, Barkha, I have so much respect for you. Thank you for everything you have done. I've been a big fan of yours from Africa and India. Dr. Vinitha and Dr. Parikh, thank you so much. Really enjoy meeting both of you as well.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew, for your kind words, and more than the kind words and the generous feedback on our work here. Thank you for leaving us with a note of optimism. God knows it's important in these times, which often seem so bleak. Thank you, as always, to all our doctors for everything that you do. Dr. Matthew from Atlanta today, Dr. Parikh, Dr. Bal, pleasure as always. And to our audience, there is hope. There continues to be hope. We tell you when things are dire, but we also tell you when there is reason to hope again. And perhaps, finally, we are at that brink where we can dare to hope again. Thank you very much to our panel and to our audience. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Goodbye.